McIntyre has all the tools at this time. And look, he'll tell you that he might not have been ready at that juncture or whatever, but he gets that declaration. I just think Vince McMahon in this period of time, something Vince historically was pretty good at going back into the 80s and 90s that he was not good at all in this era, 09, 10, 11, 12, was elevating guys to be in a position to become superstars, to become larger than life. And it's why he relied so heavily on the part-timers at this period of time because WWE did a really poor job at building the next stars outside of John Cena essentially. Everyone else was viewed at a less than tier. And I can only imagine how frustrating that must have been for some talent because there was quality talent. There were really high ceiling performers in the company at the time, but you just knew that actually breaking through was going to be nearly impossible. Look, Punk only broke through by chance. Punk was not supposed to become tippy top main tier outselling John Cena merchandise guy, but
Right.
he found something that struck and resonated, and all of a sudden that worked for him.
And I also think for Vince and company, I think it was a harder. I also think it was a challenge, more of a challenge for them than it was in the 90s and 80s, just because you have the internet is rising to prevalence. And like wrestling fans more than ever at this point are seeing like what these superstars are really like in their real life. And I think sometimes that would create conflict and
Yeah, but
pushes.
I'm going to push back on that because I
Okay, push
disagree
back,
on that.
please.
Yeah, I disagree on that because I think with the internet, you had a more, especially this time, you had a more direct voice where the fans are telling you, no, we really like Drew McIntyre. We really like Dolph Ziggler. We want to see these guys in these positions. We want to see them elevated to the main event, and we're going to get behind them. And that direct voice did not exist back in the 80s and 90s, whereas here it did. And think about how many guys could have been elevated to the main event level in this period of time that, including Drew McIntyre, that the fans, okay, they look at him, they're like, oh, he's got a lot of personality. He's a good pro wrestler. He's got a lot of the tools. Let's give him a shot. And Vince was so adamant in not letting those guys get to the next level. And I know you have a little bit of a different perspective on it, but I'm sitting here as someone who was a consumer of the product back then. I think there was a huge appetite for a lot of these guys to move on up. I don't think fans were as critical of them. I think maybe they were critical of Vlad Kozlov or, Del Rio coming in and just being thrown into the main event without any build, really. I think they were probably more critical of that stuff than anything.
I mean, the one thing I can say about if you go back to the 80s, when you see Hulk Hogan, all you know him as is as Hulk Hogan, the WWF champion. He's the guy who says his prayers, eats his vitamins. He's the guy who is this monster. If he gets hit with the finish, he makes this comeback and hulks up and beats the guy, and he's like the reigning champion, right? They never saw sides of Hulk where he was like exposed or where it was something different. It was always own brand as Hulk Hogan. And I think one of the problems that the internet added to it, but it was also beneficial. It was detrimental and beneficial because you do have people that can speak out and can say, this guy's this guy's that. But when you see people that post stuff or you see them living a life which is contradictory to the character they play on television, I think that is where some of the problems arose with getting people to the next level, just because we were just living in a different world and it was a transition and just wrestling had opened up, the curtain had been opened up and it was like figuring out how to deal with that. Because I know there's tons of times where people were in angles. And one of the first examples that really stands out is when we had the thing with me and Edge whenever I came back, right? Because it was so realistic and everybody played to it so realistically, online and whatnot. Like, if there had been like, oh yeah, we're buddies or we're friends or everybody's getting along good, it wouldn't have quite as worked as well. And I think that was a real problem for people going forward. And like, they kind of had to figure out how to work things, to make a clear difference between like, this is the character and this is the person. We're going to focus on the character, or this is the character and this is the person. We're going to find a happy place midway between both and then run with that. I think that was very problematic. I know from living with it from 2000, 2010, there were a lot of times people would get upset at the office, or Vince would be upset because someone would post something or be seen in a video somewhere that was like contradictory to what their character was doing on TV. That's
Yeah.
that's my point in
I don't
this.
know. I mean, I get what you're saying, but it still goes so far beyond that. I mean, the classic example is Wade Barrett, who Wade Barrett could have been elevated into a main event player coming out of that Nexus John Cena feud, and he wasn't. He wasn't, and I think it forever hampered him, and he never got to that next level because of that one feud. I really do believe that, and I think that was just Vince's unwillingness to give someone the ball to run with it. Where I think, thankfully, that has changed a lot in recent times. Where
Right.
I think Paul Levesque's crew is a lot more willing to give some people opportunities to run with it and see how they do. And
And I do agree with you. There were times where Vince was very hesitant to take someone and like push him to the next level. It is what it is, and you're not wrong in saying that. But
yeah,
I just wanted to
I
give
get
you
it.
my point of view about why sometimes it seemed harder for
Sure, I
them
get
to
it.
do that and strap the rocket on someone.
I get it. I mean, you've even talked about too, like where there were talks of you having a world title program. Like, sure, you had the ECW title run, and that was great. But like,
Hmm.
why not give Matt Hardy in 2007, 2008 a world heavyweight, a 2 month world heavyweight title reign, and see what comes out of it? Right? Give the opportunity, and maybe it gets over, maybe it doesn't. But it seemed like a lot of this didn't happen at the time, and it plays to my point here that Drew kind of gets lost in the oblivion.
Well,
And
we also know this. I mean, we have covered on here. We have chronicled the whole Jeff story. Jeff
mm,
barely ended up getting that reign. But
yeah,
like looking back in the past, it was super historic and it really opened up doors for him. And he was like the most popular wrestler in the world. There was a point in time where Jeff was selling as much, if not more, merch than John Cena. So yeah, I mean, there are times where you kind of have to roll the dice and take a chance.
right.
That's
And
what pro wrestling is. You have
and
to take a
and
chance every so often.
if it doesn't work, okay, you tried it for a month and a half, 2 months, and it didn't work. Move on,
Mhm.
right? Like that's it. Like this this stuff happens. It is what it is. So it was just very surprising at the time, to bring my point full circle here, that Drew didn't
Yeah.
get that chance.